Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's event. My name is Rahim Dilgir. I'm a road safety professional with TransSafe Consulting based in Vancouver, BC, which is located on the unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I've also just started my term as president of CARSP, so I'm very excited to be speaking with the CARSP membership today. I'm equally excited that we are partnering with Parachute Canada to deliver today's webinar and to be speaking with Parachute members and followers here today. And this webinar is part of the Knowledge Exchange and Training Hub program with CARSP. So the reason that we've partnered CARSP and Parachute to bring you today's webinar is because both of our organizations consider this topic to be really important. My colleague, Valerie Smith, will provide some background on the Decade of Action shortly, but I just wanted to say that, you know, it's not easy to get a whole decade allocated by the United Nations, or even a year or a day, you know, let alone a decade. So I think it really speaks to the urgency of, you know, the toll that's happening on our roads every day, as well as the fact that it is a human right for people to be safe and feel safe on our roads. So we've entitled the session "What You Need to Know About the Global Plan of the Decade of Action for Road Safety," both in terms of internationally and what we can do here in Canada. So I'll just quickly go through the agenda for today. So it'll be a tag team effort between myself and Valerie Smith from Parachute. So we'll first overview the global plan, which was very recently released, and talk about how it compares to the previous decade's plan, because there has been one in place for the past decade. And then look at here in Canada, how is that relevant for us? What can we do? And then more specifically, move on to each of our respective organizations and how we have been and will be and are currently trying to support the decade of action through our activities. And then also to talk about the global alliance of NGOs for road safety, through which both of our organizations do some work internationally. And then we're really looking forward to taking some of your questions at the end. So just before I pass it on to Val, I did want to acknowledge people working behind the scenes to make this webinar happen. Brenda Suggett from CARSP and Julie Taylor from Parachute. Thank you for your hard work in helping put on this webinar today. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to pass the floor on to Valerie Smith of Parachute.
Thanks very much, Rahim, and welcome everyone. We're super excited. We have over 230 registrants for this webinar. We're at about 115 right now, so people are flowing on, but obviously a really great interest in what's happening globally. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Val Smith, and I'm the Director of Programs at Parachute. Parachute is a national charity. We're dedicated to injury prevention. We envision a Canada free of serious injuries, with Canadians living long lives to the fullest. And one of our key strategic priorities is road safety, which is what brings us here today. To start, I want to really briefly thank the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety for their amazing leadership and mentorship on the global plan. I hope they're sitting in today. Additionally, I want to thank Desjardins Assurance for their support of Parachute in the road safety space. Globally, road traffic crashes cause nearly 1.3 million preventable deaths annually, and an estimated 15 million injuries. As things stand, road traffic crashes are set to cause a further estimated 13 million deaths and 500 million injuries over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. So recognizing the importance of the problem, governments from around the world, including Canada, declared unanimously through a resolution at the UN, a second decade of action for road safety, which takes us from 2021 to 2030, with a very explicit target to reduce road deaths and injuries by at least 50% during that period. And to guide countries to reach that target, a request was made to the UN and the World Health Organization to develop a plan which we are discussing today. So the global plan's aimed at senior policymakers, and it's meant to act as a blueprint for the development of national, local strategies, plans, and targets. It's also meant to be used by others, many of us in this webinar today, who may be able to influence decisions on road safety, on road planning, and the global plan really describes what is needed to achieve this target. It rejects business as usual and calls on government and stakeholders to take a new path, one that prioritizes and implements a safe systems approach. Next slide, please. I really like this visual that we see here for the global plan. As you can see, there's three main parts to it. So the green is what to do. The second part is how to do it. And the third portion is who does it and what are the roles for the various actors. In the left-hand corner, you can see a safe system approach in big red letters. We're super happy to see that this is central to the global plan. If you don't know, the safe systems approach is a holistic approach that recognizes that road transport is a very complex system, and it places safety at its core. It recognizes that humans, vehicles, road infrastructure need to interact in a way that ensures a high level of safety despite human error. Next slide, please. So let's discuss the what. So what is needed to reach the target? So the global plan discusses 5 main components, and I'm going to go through them very briefly because we are limited in time. I'll focus first on the multimodal transport and land use planning. So this is important because it's a new component. It wasn't clearly distinguished in the last decade of action. It was added to this decade because of the changing environment of transport that we all recognize. It assumes that 70% of the global population will be living in urban areas by 2030. And because of that, there's a real need to balance transport options within our use of space and to make for healthier cities. The plan establishes an ideal mix of motorized and non-motorized transport options to ensure equitable and safe access to mobility, while also responding to the fact that we have very diverse populations. Another interesting point that we should be aware of is the global plan is aligned with sustainable development goals. 2 sustainable development goals. One is 11.2, which is focused on access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems for all. Notably by expanding public transport with special attention to the needs of those in vulnerable situations, women, children, persons with disabilities, and our seniors. We also have aligned, or the global plan is also aligned with Sustainable Development Goal 3.6, which seeks to reduce the number of road crashes by 50%. So the 2 initiatives are very closely aligned. The second component is safe road infrastructure. As we all know, infrastructure is very essential to reduce road crashes. We need to start thinking about how our roads are built, planned, designed, operated to enable for multimodal mobility, including shared and public transport, walking, cycling, other modes of transport. We have to minimize the risk for all road users, not just drivers. And the plan outlines standards that must include basic features such as segregation of different modes of traffic, median separation from high-speed traffic, safe crossings, motorcycle lanes, bus lanes, etc. The next section is safe cars. Vehicles should be designed to ensure the safety of those inside and those outside, not just talking about cars, but also trucks and buses. And they should be designed with consideration on designs that limit the crash force in order to prevent serious injury and death. Safe road use. So this is something we're all very familiar with through our work. Speeding, impaired driving, driver fatigue, distracted driving, non-compliance with seat belts, child restraints. These are all key behaviors that we know contribute to road injury and death, and we need to continue to legislate, enforce, and educate on how to properly address these road user behaviors. Finally, post-crash recovery. So appropriate, integrated, and coordinated care should be provided as soon as a crash happens. And this is especially important in vulnerable communities and in low and middle income countries. Next slide, please. So the how do we do it? The plan clearly outlines different modes of the how. Number one that they focus on, which we can all relate to, is financing. So we know that road safety is absolutely underfunded in most countries. Long-term sustainable investment is required for the development of safe road infrastructure, as well for proven interventions that we know improve road safety. We know this is expensive, but in order to really implement a safe systems approach, we need to commit, our governments need to commit financially. It also calls on leveraging efforts and funding from other sectors who are really working to improve our communities. So how are road safety folks working with the environment, working with urban planning, mobility, and other areas? Legislation, speed enforcement and compliance, and policy changes based, again, on evidence-based recommendations. Speed management. So this is one a lot of us are really familiar with. So we know that managing speed is critical to a safe systems approach. We know it cross-cuts through a number of different factors related to safe systems, such as multi-mode transport, land use, vehicle design, road user behavior. And appropriate speed management not only directly impacts crash likelihood and severity, but it impacts the effectiveness of other safety interventions. An example might be that in densely populated areas, urban areas, we know that there's really strong evidence that speed limits should be reduced to 30 kilometers an hour. So let's start thinking about how we can do that in our urban areas. Capacity development is a big piece of this plan, and it talks about collaboration between groups, disciplines, government, non-government, and so forth. And there's also a big component around assisting lower and middle income countries. Gender consideration, we're hearing a lot about this in the road safety space in general, but ensuring a gender perspective in transport planning is happening. We know that men and women use the roads differently. They use different transport options for different reasons, and this needs to be addressed, and women do need to be at the table. And in that same light, we also need to ensure that other vulnerable road users are at the table for planning and building out strategies. The final component on the how is the focus on the low and middle income countries. We know that low and middle income countries account for more than 90% of all road traffic deaths, despite having less than 60% of the world's motor vehicles. So if we want to be part of achieving the Decade of Action target, it's going to require increased attention and support to these countries. I also want to make note of something else in the plan that I found interesting, and it was the note on multinational corporations and how they operate in low and middle income countries. It's really important that they are pressured to monitor the safety of their operations and to put in place mechanisms to prevent road trauma through the work they're doing in these countries. And they draw out commitment and adherence to road safety principles by these corporations should be the same in low and middle income countries as they are in high income countries. regardless of regulation. So it should just be something they're doing. And so that's an important component in the private sector. And finally, the role of technology in vehicles. And that could be a webinar on its own in terms of what that component will help to achieve with the new decade. Slide 8, please, Raheem. So who is involved? The plan is very much based, as I said earlier, on government. There's a substantial role for the government. We know governmental agencies are really, they have the primary responsibility to design a safe road transport system and to implement road safety action plans. However, this plan really calls out to civil society, the private sector, and funders to also take part. There's a big role for all of us. And likely we'll be holding a second webinar to talk more specifically about other work the NGOs and practitioners can be doing to support the decade. They also make mention of young people and the role of youth in the global decade, knowing that youth are the most affected by road trauma, and they will be the generation who take on the outcomes of what happens in this decade. So they encourage anyone working in this space to engage young people. Next slide, please. So how does it compare to the previous decade? So we know that there was a previous decade on road safety from 2011 to 2020, and it did not achieve the targets it hoped for. So how does the new one compare? So in this plan, measurable targets have been borrowed and updated and established based on the Sustainable Development Goals that I spoke of earlier, 3.6. So there's clear targets that they are encouraging all countries to commit to. The previous decade, one of the big criticisms was that it really saw a lack of capacity building. And there was a real need to focus on this decade on collaboration between richer countries supporting lower and middle income countries. The other big piece that I found looking at the new plan was that there's a very big focus on an integrated approach. The plan encourages road safety actors to leverage what they call the co-benefits of other sectors working to promote healthier communities. There's lots of intersections between environment, between reducing carbon emissions, between the work that's happening in public health. So how can we work together to leverage each other's agendas? Next slide, please. So what did we learn from the previous decade? Again, strengthening of partnerships and network and mobilization of resources. Road safety really needed to be on the global health and development agenda, which it now is, as seen in the SDG 11.2. And the need to follow scientific guidance and use interventions that work. And I know there's so many of you out there that bang their head against the wall when they see interventions rolling out that have no evidence. So there's a real call to ensure that we are looking at the data and looking at what works and what doesn't work. So I just shared a lot of information. A reminder, this will all be available via recording after the presentation. Over to Raheem for some information on the Canadian context.
Thanks, Val, and hi again, everyone. Thanks, Val, for mentioning about the fact that this webinar will be recorded. Before we get too far, I also did want to mention that if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A module of Zoom that might appear at the top of your screen. It's at the top of mine, but that's where the questions will be received, and then Brenda will be moderating that. Moderating a question and answer session following our presentations here. I also did want to pause for a second, because as we do, think about the toll that crashes have taken on our society and in our world. There is an opportunity every year to really reflect on this, and so I wanted to point out that just this past Sunday, was the World Day of Remembrance for Road Crash Victims. So that is something that I think it's good for us to all be aware of, not only to take time to reflect, but to share that with other, within your organizations and across with your partners to try to commemorate that day as best as we can. Yeah, so as Val mentioned, we need to think about, the global plan is for the whole world, but how does it apply to us in Canada, or what can we do to help? I think it's good in Canada to always start with some statistics and see sort of where we're at and where we've been in the past decade. So if you look at a couple of these charts from Transport Canada, Transport Canada's National Collision Database, the one on the left is numbers of fatalities and how that's trended over the past 10 years, and the one on the right is serious injuries. So you can see from the trend lines that we have made some progress, both in terms of fatalities and serious injuries over the past decade, and specifically a 21% reduction in fatalities since 2010, between 2010 and 2019, the latest year for which this information is readily available, and a 25% reduction in serious injuries. So I think that should give us some encouragement that we're moving in the right direction. All of the great work that all of you are doing is translating into results, but it's also a reminder that we have a long way to go. I mean, if you were just to look at the commitment of 50%, or the target for the past decade and this upcoming decade, although we made great progress, we weren't at a 50% reduction. So it's just a reminder that we always need to look for ways to do better, which is why knowledge is regularly being developed on this topic, so we can look at new ways of doing what we do, so that we can go further than we have been in terms of achieving results. And if you were to look more closely at the data, there's a few areas where the trend line is actually going up, at least in terms of percentage, not necessarily by number. But if it is going down by number, it's going down a lot more slowly than other factors. So these two factors that you see the trend lines for are distracted or inattentive driving and speeding related collisions. So they are making up a larger percentage of the total fatalities than they have before. It's kind of gone up and down, but the overall trend line shows that at least we're staying, we're going up, if not staying the same. So we need to reverse that trend as well. So these are some areas specifically to think about how we can do better. Now, when also looking at global plans, it's important to recognize, well, what plans do we already have in place in Canada? And I think that's it. Many of us do have plans at various levels of government, as well as in other organizations. But let's start nationally. Canada has had a documented road safety strategy called Canada's Road Safety Strategy 2025 that extended from 2016 to 2025. So not necessarily aligned with the decade, but it didn't wait for this current decade to develop this plan. And so that's been in place for a few years. It was endorsed by the Council of Ministers responsible for road safety. And its overall vision is towards zero, having the safest roads in the world. It's an aspirational vision in the sense that there's no target year, but zero is the ultimate goal. And what the document does is really, I guess, put the onus on all levels of government, both other national government ministries as well as provincial and municipal levels of government, to develop their own plans to achieve these collective goals. So hopefully, at local levels, they can be consistent with and further build on the goals that have been set as part of Canada's road safety strategy. And by the way, if you're not familiar with this document, I think it's a great starting point to understand our kind of the Canadian, what's down on paper already for Canada as a country. And you can find this document at the website that's shown on the screen. So I wanted to point out a couple of things that are in common between the Canadian Road Safety Strategy 2025 and the global plan. And one is the emphasis on the safe system approach, which Val had talked about, and which you see kind of pictured in the graphic here. This graphic was actually taken from the WHO, but embedded right in Canada's plan. So that speaks to the I guess the compatibility and the use of a very similar approach with similar components here in Canada that's being endorsed. So it could take a long time to just go through this wheel, but just quickly, there are key areas such as safe road users, safe vehicles, safe road infrastructure. Speeds could be part of this as well, and the other layers of the wheel talk about some more specific areas or strategies or causes of collisions that do need to be addressed as part of the system, as well as the various groups that are need to be targeted in order for us to succeed, and the outside layer, various levers that we can use towards those efforts. So there is clear alignment between Canada's strategy and the global plan on the key target groups, those of high risk drivers, young drivers, and vulnerable road users, as well as some of the key contributing factors, some of which you saw represented in the graphics that I presented earlier, where we probably need to do more to make greater progress: alcohol and drug impaired driving, distracted driving, and speeding. I think it's really important to note that at various, in various parts of our great country, many of you around the table here have developed your own road safety strategic plans and policies, and are not necessarily waiting for other levels of government to do something more concrete. And as mentioned, the national document does primarily leave it to other local jurisdictions to take a lead in many areas. And of course, there's many issues that are more prominent at the kind of municipal and urban environment that do need to be addressed on a local basis. So, in response to that, we're aware of at least 5 provinces that have developed a formal road safety strategic plan or policy. A couple of those may not be effective anymore. Things have changed in the past couple of years, but there's been at least 5 that have developed such plans in the last few years, and over 30 municipalities. And some of them, like you see pictured here, that's the front cover of the City of Edmonton's Road Safety Strategy 2016 to 2020, although I believe they've come up with an updated one that really go into a lot of detail, and especially including a lot of infrastructure measures which are better managed at the local level, that are consistent with Vision Zero and safe system principles. So there's a lot of resources to go to if you're from a municipality to see what others have planned and are doing. And just so you know, that this information was taken from a project that's currently underway by the Transportation Association of Canada on the synthesis of Canadian practice in Vision Zero and the safe system approach. I also wanted to acknowledge that there are resources on Parachute's website that list and provide a bit of information on different municipalities across the country and and provinces and territories and what they are doing. So I just wanted to share one example of a municipality that was looking to align with the global plan. So this municipality, the City of Lethbridge in Alberta, has set an ultimate goal to reach 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2040. So to go down from what they have now in terms of 26 serious injuries and 2 fatalities down to 0. and to try to achieve that on a consistent, on a linear downward trend, which would mean to reduce those incidents by half by 2030, which is exactly what is promoted by the Decade of Action and the Towards Zero Foundation's campaign in support of the Global Decade of Action. So that's something that various municipalities can try to do, is set similar goals, and then of course put the strategies in place to achieve those goals. And just briefly, I'm going to mention a couple of areas where our two organizations, CARSP and Parachute, have collaborated, again, in support of the Decade of Action and the global plan in our own ways. And so, first of all, when the global plan was released on October 28th, just a few weeks ago, CARSP and Parachute made a joint statement in support. And it reads, "Together, the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals and Parachute strongly support this global plan for road safety, and we are committed to working with key stakeholders across Canada to use this global plan to guide and measure our ongoing work to make Canadian roads safer." So I think that's important to make these statements. I mean, what's of course more important is the action that follows, but it starts with a commitment, and then that would help drive the action. And towards helping with that action, in the same press release, we shared some of the resources that are available from the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety that Val spoke about earlier. So we've provided the link there in case any of you find it useful. There's things like graphics and posters and other links to other resources and things that you could hopefully make use of at your in the organizations and the partners with whom that you work. So we went further than that, than just making a statement in support, to submit a letter to the federal government, to the new Minister of Transportation. And that was really to kind of suggest making a formal statement in support as well, and take responsibility for implementing the global plan in Canada. And the letter includes a few suggestions, including looking at perhaps lower default speed limits in areas where vulnerable road users and vehicles mix. And of course, discussing that with the provinces and municipalities, since those are provincial and municipal jurisdiction. And of course, many provinces and municipalities have already gone ahead and lowered default speed limits in their municipalities. But a consistent approach across Canada is always something great. And that letter is currently pending the minister's response. So just wanted to, in the interest of transparency, share that with all of you. Val and I will just take a few more minutes just to talk about other resources that we have been offering and are offering currently that will hopefully help all of you in your various jurisdictions and capacities. So for CARSP, I wanted to actually start with our vision and mission. That CARSP does, endorse a Vision Zero philosophy and a safe system approach. And I wanted to specifically point out that in our mission statement, what we see as kind of a very central to our organization is supporting road safety professionals across the country by providing access to multidisciplinary research and knowledge in this area. So really to share knowledge and make that available. And we've specifically noted that this is in support of the United Nations road safety resolutions. So although our goal has traditionally, and our mandate has traditionally been limited to Canada, we are moving outside of that and looking at ways that we can support internationally. recognizing, that lower and middle income countries are in a much more difficult situation, and it is we're in a position to be doing more, and I believe it's our ethical obligation to do more. So in the interest of sharing knowledge, both locally and internationally, the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals has established a knowledge exchange and training hub. So what that consists of is a lot of professional development opportunities, webinars like this, surveys with our membership to understand what are the needs, so that we could come up with the right training resources, as well as a list of people, experts in various areas that could help deliver these workshops. And then these webinars are very much in response to the stated needs of our membership. And there's different components of the Knowledge Exchange and Training Hub, which we'll probably cover in a greater detail at a future webinar. But I wanted to mention that one of the and that will be launched at some point in the future when the website is fully designed. But one of the resources that is not waiting for that full website design, and which was shared again on the launch date of the global plan, is a page dedicated to road safety information. So this is a page that you can go to. It's available now on CARS's website at this link here, and it really covers some of the basics. This was done in response to a lot of media requests for information on these subjects. So in addition to doing the interviews and that we were doing in the past, we thought it was important to make this information readily available and to help create this consistent baseline of knowledge among not only the media but the public. So I think this information will be useful for both all of us as professionals, as well as the media and the public. And these are some of the specific areas for which there's information provided, which is basically a few paragraphs of information, some statistics, and then some links that are already out there that you could easily go to. So it's a great starting point for any information on road safety in Canada. I also wanted to mention, coming back again to our international responsibility and some of the things that we have been doing. So CARS has been a member of the Global Alliance for a number of years. We've been present at a number of international conferences. One of them you see the kind of pictured here in the top is the first African Road Safety Forum. So that occurred about 3 years ago, and it was a great historic, really, milestone for all the African countries where the road toll is it's just been unimaginable, to actually get together and really focus on the problem and possible solutions, with the ministers of transportation really showing their leadership as part of that event. Also, the most recent CARS conference a few months ago was in partnership with an international organization, La Prévention Routière Internationale, earlier this year, and I hope some of you had a chance to participate in that. And I did want to mention that there is a handbook that's been in development for a few years now, by a group a publisher out of Sweden, where whole Vision Zero movement started. And the Canadian chapter is being led by a Parachute, and CARS has contributed to that book, or to that chapter of the book. And our latest information is that will be released in the new year. Now, something I really wanted to mention here is that and share from our CARS, our strategic plan and our work plan, is that we do want to explore both the need and the capacity and desires for our members to be involved more formally in knowledge transfer to lower and middle income countries that need us. And that could include just sharing information virtually, whether it's by email. It could mean some online virtual meetings for now, training or coaching, basically helping build capacity locally, so that countries and organizations internationally are in a better position to achieve these global goals. It could perhaps, if once there's more and more restrictions being lifted, lead to possible placements, in certain countries. So I know many of us have a history in certain countries, whether we were born there or visited there in the past, and it may be an opportunity to then contribute the knowledge that we've gained here in Canada back to those countries. Lastly, before I turn it back to Val, I wanted to mention that the CARS conference for the next year in June in Sudbury, Ontario, currently planned as a hybrid in-person and virtual conference, has the theme collaborating on the United Nations Decade of Action for Road Safety. So this topic will continue to be explored at that conference. So happy to turn it back to Val now.
Thanks, Raheem. And I am keeping my eye on the time. And so I'm going to go through the last portions fairly promptly. We did want to leave some time for Q&A. I just want to let everyone know if we don't get to your questions, I've already read through them. I'm super excited to answer them. We will connect with everyone individually and engage in some conversations. Okay, so how will Parachute help to support the Global Decade? Next slide, please, Raheem. So we're going to continue to engage government at all levels on road safety in general, as well as on the global plan. There was a question in the Q&A about how we can get that information down to the local level, and we're going to do that through our work on Vision Zero, as well as these discussions specifically about the plan. We're going to encourage collaboration amongst NGOs and public health, private companies, other groups. We recently completed a series of roundtables with over 20 national organizations active in not just road safety, but in the environment, urban planning, active transport, seniors, mobility. We brought all these groups together to discuss the intersections between the work we're doing and how can we work together to be a stronger voice. This is called the Change for Good Roads Initiative, and we're going to release the findings over the next few weeks. And I would welcome anyone to connect with me directly if you want to be part of that discussion. Really excited about that initiative. We're going to encourage stakeholders to try to agree and communicate on road safety messages that are evidence-based, and try to be a little more consistent in the language we're sharing with the Canadian public. We're going to continue to work with media to advocate for increased road safety discourse and changing the language on how we report on our road trauma. And we will continue the work we're doing with municipalities on and encouraging the Vision Zero approaches in road safety planning. And finally, we're going to continue to roll out our communication campaigns that we do in partnership with a number of other provincial and territorial partners. And a lot of that is focused on safe road user behavior with a focus on sharing the road, as well as specific messaging on Vision Zero. All of these campaigns are in collaboration with other partners, and they are all open for fellow colleagues to take part in. So again, I would encourage you to connect. Next slide, sorry. Just wanted to point to the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety. I won't go through this slide, but an amazing resource if you do want to get behind the Global Decade. They've really been a great organization to work with. Last slide. What can you do? What can organizations do? You can skip that one, Raheem, to support the Global Decade. So first thing you can do, it's a big document, but it's really informative and helpful. Review the global plan, inform your partners and networks about it. Consider endorsing the Decade of Action as a road safety organization. Be creative in how you might endorse the decade. Work with local government and planners to make sure they're trying to align with safe systems principles within the global plan. Collaborate with like-minded organizations, governments, think about working outside the box, work with public health, work with environment groups, active transport groups, and try to collaborate on the work you're doing with road safety. You can write to your ministers, your members of parliament. Please connect with Parachute if you'd like to do this. We can support you. And try to keep media, road safety in the media spotlight. We need to continue to drive and increase political will by building interest and commitment from our Canadian public on the importance of road safety. And continue to connect with us on our Twitter handles, and just go to our website for more information. That's it from me. Thank you very much. And I'll open it to Brenda to start fielding our questions. We have about 13 minutes left.
All right. Thank you so much to both Raheem and Val. Those were very informative presentations, and you managed to get a lot of information in a very short amount of time. As Val said, my name is Brenda Suggett, and I'm the Executive Director of CARST, and I will be moderating this session. And I think we've already been telling you to put it in the Q&A area. Just also a little more information about the web recording. We will be sending an email out in the days coming, also with links. Some of you have been asking for about links to UN related resources. We will make sure those are included as well. And I would also just like to thank everyone for attending today and making time for this in their schedules. So now we'll start with some of the questions here. Keep them coming in. One of them, it's from Robin Hutchinson, and she says, or he, sorry, I don't know if it's a man or a woman. If Canada is a world leader, why follow US road design standards and not European? So that's a very specific question, and I don't know, I'll turn it to you, Raheem, if you know the answer to that one.
Well, I don't know if there's an easy answer, but I can mention that, and just in case the questioner wasn't aware, that there are a number of standards that are Canadian based, and yes, historically some of them did come from the U.S. But I think we in recent years have been making greater and greater progress in the area of guidelines and standards. There are new versions of manuals about the geometric design manual and the traffic control manual that have been released in the last few years, and those go a lot further than they did before in terms of new standards in support of safe system principles and looking at explicit consideration of road safety. But there is still a long way to go, and I think we do need to look at inspiration from around the world as much as possible in the daily work we do, and not only those national standards and guidelines documents that are available.
Great, thank you, Raheem. Next question is from Bob Dewar, and he says, what specifically will be done to reduce pedestrian fatalities? That's also a big a big area to cover. So either one of you, either one who wants to take that.
Yeah, so I can just briefly answer. As you said, it's a very, very big discussion. At Parachute, we are trying to support and encourage municipalities to embrace the safe systems approach. Many cities call it Vision Zero, some call it a safe systems approach, where pedestrians are considered of the utmost importance as vulnerable road users. In the safe systems approaches, we're encouraging built environment changes that will make it safer for pedestrians in terms of, whether they're seniors or children. And it's really about how we're building our roads and how we're building our crossings, what we're doing in the built environment. We actually have some great documentation, and we've worked with some great researchers like Linda Rotman and others who have some really clear information about what works and what doesn't when it comes to pedestrian safety. So happy to connect with you, Bob, after that discussion or after this discussion.
And Raheem, did you have anything to add?
No, other than the fact that, just to recognize that there's a lot of good work that is being done to separate pedestrians from other road users, such as leading pedestrian intervals, wider sidewalks, and the list goes on and on.
And just to reiterate something that Val said earlier about a number of, or maybe it was you, Raheem, that a number of municipalities have already put forward the 30-kilometer, they've made those changes. So I know that there's a lot that are pushing for that right now in the urban areas. So that's obviously going to have a big impact.
Yeah, and on that, Brenda, the global plan, I didn't get into it too specifically, but the plan and the work the Alliance is doing globally really focuses on the 30-kilometer-an-hour in densely urban areas. And that's very specifically to protect our pedestrians.
Okay, very good. Now I had a number of just comments about vehicles and how important vehicle design is. but also standards in terms of advertising. So one person commented that there needs to be stronger controls related to advertising that displays speeding and really encourages and promotes that. So stronger controls on that. And another thing is within low and middle income countries, having the same regulations as they do in the developed countries, regardless of, it should be the same regulations to have safer vehicles in all countries, basically. And any other comments either of you want to add about the importance of vehicle design and advertising of vehicles?
I can briefly mention that it's really important, and it's something that I know a lot of us who work more at the provincial and municipal level feel a little bit helpless about, because it is a bit more regulated nationally. But I think there's a long way to go nationally in terms of making certain safety features standard in all vehicles, and getting more support from the public sector in terms of the auto manufacturers in terms of going along with whatever's kind of left to them and that can't be regulated specifically. So I think I can give one example from that conference in Africa that I attended, where there was a decision made to try to really reduce what was happening in terms of uncrashworthy vehicles being kind of delivered, basically the continent being used as a dumping ground for old vehicles that were not crashworthy from European countries. So that's something that does need to be stopped, which is really important.
Okay, and I just want to share a comment by Jenny Bahar. It's in response to Bob Dewar's question, just the fact that safe speeds is a pillar of the safe systems approach, which the Decade of Action does promote. And she also states that speed is the dominant factor in achieving a safe system where any impact on the human body is kept to tolerable levels. This pillar is not explicitly shown in either the Global Decade of Action or CCMA strategy. However, as I say, the safe system approach is definitely promoted. And as Val said a minute ago, the 30km/h is something that the Global Alliance and the Road Safety Collaboration definitely promote. Okay, so keep those questions coming in. I have a couple of questions myself. This one I'm going to let's see, give it over to both of you, actually. It's with respect to youth. You talked earlier about how they are the ones that will inherit basically the strategies and the outcomes that come from how we approach and deal with today's issues. They're also a group that are most amenable to change. So if we can sway them, which they seem very passionate about things, then their voice, they have a lot of energy and they can keep things going. So what are some ways that we can better engage the youth? So I'll let you each say something. Val, did you want to go first?
Sure, I'll jump in. We do a lot of work at Parachute and to engage youth, especially around our teen driver safety programming. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, youth are change makers. That's going to be a big component of our 2022 Teen Driver Safety Week. We also have to recognize that youth and teens are really grasping with a lot of issues right now, especially just coming out of COVID, and their lives are turned upside down. And so how do we re-engage them in issues like the environment and like road safety, where we might have had a lot more engagement previously? And so that's one thing we're actually thinking about. Parachute's doing, we've just brought in a researcher to help us look at how to really engage youth on road safety. She's doing some brilliant work to get some good answers that we'll be able to share with these networks, so that we're not just treating youth engagement as tokenism. We actually really need to work with youth and get them to help drive change. Yeah.
Okay, very good. And Raheem?
Maybe I'll just add a couple things. One, I think it's really important for road safety education to be more formally incorporated in the elementary and secondary school systems. And I know that's happening in some, but the more the better. And secondly, really just to echo that, I think if we do want to achieve different results with the youth, we need to take different approaches. And a big part of that is involving the youth themselves in leading and playing a big part in developing those strategies, whether it's greater use of technology and virtual reality and apps and things like that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Raheem. And I'm going to direct this one to you, Raheem. What do you think is the role of private sector in this new decade of action? It is mentioned in the global plan, and I just wondered what your thoughts are on how we can engage them and make them responsible for some of this change.
So we talked briefly about auto manufacturers on the vehicle side, but it goes well beyond that. I mean, there's many, of course, many industries have their own fleets. Most employers have, I mean, regardless, all employers really have people going to the office, except maybe these days a little less. But so in terms of policies, company policies for safe driving, use of safe vehicles, such as not using mobile phones while on company time, and so from the policy perspective, as well as from the sponsorship perspective, and getting the public sector more involved in funding many of the initiatives, because we're always, I think, in government struggling for getting more funding to support our initiatives. And I think this is where we really need to partner more with the private sector and find win-win situations.
Okay, perfect. Well, we're almost at the end of our time. And Val, we had a question about the environment. I'm wondering if you could handle that question. And
sure, yeah. So
great.
I think the question was how we're connecting with the work that's being done on the environment and on the reduction of carbon emissions. And I think this is a really interesting question, and we're just starting to really look at, as I said, collaborating with groups whose agenda is around emissions and reduction of emissions. I believe in Canada, transportation is one of the biggest contributors of emissions. I think it's over 25% of all emissions, which is quite substantial. So there is a really urgent need, I would say, for us to take action on reducing road transportation emissions. And I know we're running out of time. I think one of the ways to do this is to really continue to push multimodal transport. And that's a big part of the global plan. It's a big part of the work we're doing with our collective. And there's so many amazing groups doing this work in Canada and elsewhere. So really great question. And I think there's so many amazing ways for us to work with environmental groups. I think our work goes hand in hand. And sorry, Brenda, to wrap up, I saw a comment about engaging academics and researchers. I should have really taken a minute during my presentation when I was talking about who are the actors in this. Absolutely, academics and researchers, we need them. We need them to tell us what is working, where is the data pointing us, where are collisions happening, and to help us, do evaluations on programming and so forth. So apologies if I didn't explicitly talk about researchers and academics, but amazing work. And we really hope we can continue to work with you guys.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Val. And that is the end of our time. And I just want to thank everybody so much for attending. And as Val said, for those of you we didn't get to your question, we will follow up individually with you. So thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.